During the parade, a toddler ran straight into the path of charging horses. Everyone froze, except for one old, dismissed horse. He broke formation and did the unthinkable. But what happened next will shock even the most unshakable. First, let's go back to the beginning. The May sun draped Washington, D.C. in a sheen of golden clarity, casting sharp shadows along the marble architecture and catching the buttons of every military jacket with a glare that seemed to demand perfection. The presidential procession had begun, and with it, the precise choreography of national pride. Every line, salute, and hoofbeat was scripted, down to the second. It was not just a parade, it was theater. The audience, thousands deep, watched with awe, their admiration tethered not to the individuals on horseback, but to the institution they represented. And yet, beneath the grandeur, there were cracks. Private Jackson Reed, positioned awkwardly near the rear of the formation, sat rigid atop a horse that didn't belong in such polished company. Maverick, once a war horse in ceremonial duties, now bore the look of something out of step with time. His gait carried a subtle limp, and a faded white scar traced his right flank. Old, but not forgotten. His coat, though brushed for hours that morning, refused to gleam like the others. Jackson had done his best, he always did, but Maverick's best days were clearly behind him. The whispering began early. "Here comes the antique duo," one guard muttered, just loud enough for the others to chuckle. Another added, "He's got more rust than armor." Even a few members of the diplomatic press corps took notice, cameras panning past Jackson as if to erase the blemish from the story of excellence. Jackson heard it all but held his posture. His grip on the reins was firm, but his knuckles were white not from tension but from resolve. Unlike the others, he didn't come from a lineage of officers or a tradition of equestrian training. He had joined the Royal Guard to escape the gravity of a fractured childhood and a string of unremarkable jobs. Service meant redemption. But riding Maverick felt like punishment. He'd been offered a reassignment 3 times. Each time he declined. "He listens," Jackson would say, even when Maverick clearly didn't. "He's just tired. He's still loyal." The truth was, Jackson saw something in Maverick that mirrored his own reflection. Worn around the edges, dismissed by those in command, quietly battling irrelevance. And in that unspoken bond, he found a purpose no medal could validate. But to the others, it looked like stubbornness. Maybe it was. But the Capitol marched on, and as they turned the corner onto Constitution Avenue, Jackson and Maverick moved as one, out of sync with the rest perhaps, but unwavering. Neither of them knew that within moments the world would watch them differently. But for now, they remained the footnote at the end of an otherwise perfect parade. The brass of the marching band clashed triumphantly through the avenue, masking the growing weight of tension that only a few would later admit they'd sensed, some small discord in the perfection. Banners fluttered. Guards kept their heads high, their horses pristine in motion. Jackson Reed rode in silence, eyes trained ahead, barely aware of the sweat gathering beneath his collar. Maverick moved stiffly but held rhythm, his hooves tapping against the pavement like the last, worn ticks of an aging clock. Then came the scream. It sliced through the fabric of order like a tear in ceremonial silk. High, panicked, maternal. Every sound faltered. Brass wavered, drums stuttered, the cadence of footsteps missed a beat. The line of guards faltered not from physical disruption, but psychological fracture. Heads turned, eyes darted, but bodies froze. At the edge of the street, a child stood alone. She could not have been older than 2, barely steady on her feet. Her sun hat had fallen behind her. Her small arms were outstretched, not in fear, but in curiosity. A parade to her was colors and music and motion, not danger. But in her path were 24 mounted stallions trained to obey order above instinct, each bearing hundreds of pounds of rider and armor, unable to halt without direction or command. And none came. Mothers screamed. Someone dropped a soda. Another raised a phone but forgot to press record. And then Maverick moved. There was no whistle, no tug of reins, no command from Jackson. The old horse surged forward, peeling out of the line as if guided by something older than training, older even than fear. The audience gasped, not yet in awe, but in alarm. A guard breaking rank meant disgrace, reprimand, an international incident perhaps. But Maverick didn't care. He darted sideways, hoofbeats echoing like a rebel's drum. Jackson barely had time to process it. The reins slipped through his fingers, but he clutched them anyway, leaning forward, not in control but unwilling to let go. Maverick weaved past startled riders. His legs, stiff minutes ago, now flowed with purpose. As he reached the child, he slowed, not with hesitation, but with grace. He curled his body, shielding her with his flank. One rear hoof tapped the curb. He leaned not to strike, but to nudge, gently, like a breath of wind. The girl stumbled backward, caught by the edge of the stone barrier. She began to wail, and in that cry came relief. She was unharmed. Jackson dismounted before Maverick even stopped moving. Knees hitting pavement, hands out, he gathered the child close, the sound of the crowd beginning to swell behind him. No longer chaos, but astonishment. Maverick stood still now, like a statue of defiance carved in flesh and bone. Dust swirled around his legs, sunlight crowning his mane. For the first time that day, the parade stopped. The air, moments ago thick with panic and clamor, shifted into something tense and uncertain. The regiment stood frozen, not in formation now, but in the uneasy stillness that follows an unforgivable breach of decorum. The parade was halted mid-procession, its rhythm broken. Behind the curtain of discipline and ceremony, a crack had been struck, and it was spreading. From the front ranks, Major Jonathan Collier advanced like a cannonball on legs, every step thunderous with fury. His gloves snapped as he yanked them off, face flushed not from the heat, but humiliation. This was his battalion, his parade, his spotless record, and now a low-ranking private and a decrepit horse had upended it all on national soil. "You've embarrassed the guard," Collier spat as he stopped inches from Jackson's face. His voice, though restrained, trembled with anger. "You violated protocol in full view of the world. You'll answer for this, court-martial, at the very least." Jackson, still breathless, still cradling the sobbing child in one arm, didn't flinch. Dirt clung to his knees. Maverick's reins hung loose in his free hand. He opened his mouth to respond, unsure what words could possibly justify what had just occurred. But the moment was ripped from him. A sound rose, not of authority, but of humanity. The crowd, silent at first, had found its voice. What began as scattered applause turned quickly into thunderous, relentless cheering. People surged forward, clapping, shouting, crying. A man hoisted his daughter onto his shoulders. A woman near the barrier wept openly, filming with trembling hands. Voices cried out together. "The horse saved her! Look at the footage. He knew what he was doing." Across the world, 1,000 screens lit up. Within minutes, social media flooded with grainy videos from every angle. Maverick breaking rank, weaving through chaos, shielding a child with impossible precision. Hashtags bloomed. #Maverick. The hero, #Royal Guard Miracle. Comment sections exploded. Debates raged, not over punishment, but over medals, statues, stories for children. Even as the regiment's officers scrambled to contain the narrative, it had already outpaced them. The president, seated atop the Capitol balcony and briefed within moments, requested a meeting. "Bring me the horse," she reportedly said, "and the man who stayed with him." Behind closed doors, Jackson was summoned to a room of polished oak and antique portraits. No charges were mentioned. Instead, a colonel slid a document across the table. Promotion, honor, a reassignment of prestige. But Jackson only asked for one thing. Let Maverick retire in peace. With me. He's done enough for any nation. There was no debate. The Guard didn't just lose a soldier that day. They gained a legend. The sun rose softly over the National Mall, its light catching on the dome of the Capitol and glinting across the names etched into stone memorials nearby. This was not the setting for battle drills or political declarations today. There were no formations, no salutes barked in cadence. Instead, a gentle hush fell over the gathered crowd, a reverence not born of tradition, but of something quieter, deeper. Gratitude. Spring blossoms swayed on the breeze, petals drifting across the plaza like confetti laid by nature itself. Beneath the canopy of cherry trees stood Maverick, hooves planted firmly, silver-gray mane braided with quiet care. His bridle had been polished to a soft gleam, though no one tried to make him into something he wasn't anymore. The scars on his flank were still visible, unhidden, unashamed. If anything, they lent him a kind of majesty no ceremonial breed could ever replicate. In full dress uniform, Jackson Reed stood beside him, holding the reins not as a rider commanding a mount, but as a friend honoring a companion. His eyes were wet, not from spectacle but from the weight of what Maverick had come to symbolize. As the announcer called their names, a child's voice rang out first from the crowd, clear and unprompted. "That's the horse who saved the little girl." A ripple of applause began, swelling until it became a standing ovation. Reporters raised their cameras, veterans saluted with hands shaking from age, and children perched on their parents' shoulders to glimpse the horse who had defied the expectations of an entire system. Then came the moment. A velvet box was brought forward and opened with solemnity. Inside, nestled in blue silk, gleamed a custom-forged medal, neither military nor civic, but something new entirely. Its inscription read simply, "For valor beyond command." With deliberate grace, the medal was placed around Maverick's neck. The crowd fell silent. Jackson stepped closer, whispered so only Maverick could hear. "They called you useless." He swallowed hard. "You proved everyone wrong." And then, impossibly, Major Collier, the same man who had once stormed toward them in fury, approached. No longer rigid with protocol, he removed his gloves, placed his hand against Maverick's neck, and let it linger. "You reminded us what it means to serve," he said, his voice catching on emotion he could no longer contain. Maverick didn't rear or snort. He simply exhaled, a deep, contented breath, and turned his ears forward toward the crowd, calm, attentive, dignified. From that day forward, Maverick and Jackson were no longer soldiers, but symbols. They toured classrooms, visited hospital wards, and stood silent beside those whose battles had left them unseen. And everywhere they went, they left behind the same quiet truth. That strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply protects.